Contextualism or isolationism. They're two contrastingly different approaches as to how you should view art. Contextualism says that you should go in armed with all of the knowledge that you possibly can, and that will help you understand and appreciate a painting more. Isolationism says that you should just be able to look at the painting in its own way, and the painting should speak to you. And that's the true way to understand art. What one is very empiricist in the sense that you have to have data, and the art adds to the data and allows you to then form your own conclusion. The other is almost romantic. It's that beauty is everlasting, and it can speak across times and across historical contexts.
Kai, welcome to the show.
Good to be here. Thanks.
Is art in and of itself valuable? Does the canvas or the paint that is on the canvas provide us with any value? Or is it only the context and the history behind the art of which we derive its value? Do you know, this painting is potentially 450 years old, owned by royalty, dramatically stolen, and is an enigmatic masterpiece in the case of Mona Lisa. Is it the composition of Mona Lisa that gives it value, or is it the context and the information that goes along with that composition that we get its value from?
Oh, and with that, you have touched on one of the major questions in the philosophy of art, which is contextualism or isolationism. They're two contrastingly different approaches as to how you should view art. Contextualism says that you should go in armed with all of the knowledge that you possibly can, and that will help you understand and appreciate a painting more. Isolationism says that you should just be able to look at the painting in its own way, and the painting should speak to you. And that's the true way to understand art. What one is very empiricist in the sense that you have to have data, and the art adds to the data and allows you to then form your own conclusion. The other is almost romantic. It's that beauty is everlasting, and it can speak across times and across historical contexts. Now, I struggle with this sometimes when I try go to galleries. Do I need to look everything up about the artist, or do I just go and make my mind up as I go along? I think in reality, like most things, you've just got to be rational about it. There's no point going to see Picasso's Guernsey and then you don't know about fascism in Spain and what the painting's meant to portray. But then there are other instances where you walk into a room and you see Mark Rothko's. Sometimes you're just meant to feel them. You can't, and trying to explain it is almost the thing that undermines your ability to appreciate or feel it. I remember going into the Tate Modern, and I didn't know much about Cy Twombly. He's an American artist, sort of abstract expressionist sort, and just feeling awestruck by his massive paintings in the Tate Modern. I didn't know anything about him, but I sure as hell went away and then researched him afterwards. So I don't know if there's a right way or a wrong way, but there's something romantic, I think, about being able to look at something anew and have its beauty speak to you. It's very sort of Keats-esque with Ode on a Grecian Urn. So, great question.
I'm no art expert nor lover if on a sort of academic sense, but probably the most famous example would be if you went to the Louvre, for example. For €5 you can rent a headset, and you can pick on any painting and it tells you about it. As an amateur going in, if I was then just let loose in the Louvre, I don't know, I'd just walk around and I'd see the big ones. I'd be quite, the Feast of Cana, that would be quite a striking one. For the rest, I'd be like, I don't know. But then it was with the headset I really got to enjoy it, and I really felt the lid was lifted on this murky art world of cloak and dagger and history and hidden context and hidden meaning.
No, of course, that's a very good point. I guess the counter to that, I agree with you, and I loved in the Louvre they have the Nintendo Game Boy guides, which are sensational.
I felt like I'd gone back 15 years.
Yeah, exactly. I loved it. But the challenge to that would be, Keats, for example, he talks about something known as negative capability. He wrote about it in a letter to his brother, and it's the ability to not question too much and just appreciate things as you see them. At the end of his poem, Ode on a Grecian Urn, when the urn finally speaks to the poet, the speaker, it just ends with the line, "Truth is beauty, beauty truth. That is all ye on earth know, and all ye need to know." And it's just something about some things are greater than knowledge can grasp or the human mind can comprehend. And it's just transmitted to us, and we should enjoy that and not probe and question exactly why the artist made it at this point. Others would disagree. They're two perspectives. I think there's space for both.
I guess I can completely understand it from an accessibility point of view of if you want to get more people in, make it easier for them so they can understand. But I also think with fine pieces of art, just like fine pieces of literature, what makes them special or the things that means that they're not meant to be easily accessible. Do you know, there needs to be work put in order for you to understand. And that's where you derive the value, not necessarily just understanding it on first principles. Do you know, if you were to pick up a work from Kant or whatever, you can't just understand it necessarily straight off the bat without seriously thinking about it or seriously rereading it about 10 times. And I think a lot of the times a painting's like that as well, that it's only when you have the backstory, when you just sit down and study it, that's when you get the value.
Yes. I also think when it comes to, you're right. You've got to take the time, and for some reason, what you're mentioning makes me think of the the gallery in which Michelangelo's David is in Florence.
Yeah.
And everyone flocks towards David, but on either sides there are four unfinished sculptures by Michelangelo, his Prisoners series. And you almost see how the process of the artistic creation, how difficult it is. You see these figures emerging from blocks of stone, and you think, how on earth does one even begin to start to create that? So I agree with you. And if I may, I would, it's interesting how a lot of people will, and I'm sometimes guilty of this, will look at a complex piece of art. You'll look at the academic approach of Jacques Louis David and be like, that is so realistic, it's sensational, or Canaletto's canals. But there's an interesting anecdote. I don't know if it's true or not. It's one of those apocryphal stories about Picasso. He was doodling on a napkin in a cafe in the south of France. Do you know this one?
Yeah.
And yeah, he throws it onto the floor, and the lady picks it up and runs after him and says, "Picasso, Picasso, can I have this?" He says, "Well, you've got to pay for it." And she says, "How much will it be?" He says, 50,000 euros. She said, "But it just took you a minute to draw." And he said, "No, it took me a lifetime." And so you begin to appreciate that sometimes Rothko towards the end might not look that complex, but it's a whole lifetime of work to get there. Same with Jackson Pollock. If you look at their early work and their later work, there's clearly been a development, even though it may not look like that on the canvas.
You have a particular penchant for Dutch still life portraits. What's that all about?
So it goes back to what we were talking about before we begun, about how, if life is like a museum and the world of art is a room within that museum, I've been running around different parts trying to learn about them and realizing where the gaps are. And I'd always looked at Dutch still lifes as these rather bland, dour, still paintings. And then I thought, no, there's got to be more to it. So I started doing some research into them. And what I absolutely love about them is that they're two things at the same time. It weaves in history, it weaves in the economy, it weaves in Dutch Golden Age, but it also weaves in philosophy and, existence and memento moris and existentialism in the same way. So first, they're basically the equivalents of super yacht selfies wearing a Rolex with a bottle of champagne. The Dutch at that time were the wealthiest nation on earth. And so your artists like Boscart, De Heim, Clays were interested in capturing that opulence. Lobsters, rare fruits that you wouldn't see, silver jugs, the finest satins. And so it's basically saying, hey, look how wealthy we are. These are all the things we've got. But secondly, if you look at them closer, almost every single still life has this. They are meditations on mortality. You will see a turned over goblet. You might see a lemon peeled a bit, so it looks like the circularity of time. You might see food being half eaten, a sign that we're all of us are part of the way through our lives. And so it's those two things at once that I find absolutely fascinating. So whenever you look at a Dutch still life, look for the flies, look for the subtle signs that things might not all be as perfect as they seem. And that's what I love about art in general, is that you've got the painting as it is, you've got the historical context, but you've also normally got some sort of a hidden meaning that can offer endless opportunities and hours to explore.
One of my favorite stories about the time, and I'm not entirely sure if it is true, but at the time, they used to rent pineapples. So in order at dinner parties to display wealth, they'd be like, look at this exotic fruit which no one can get their hands on. And they would obviously pretend it's there. It's like the whole rent a handbag thing of the modern age. But back then, they would just rent a pineapple and put it in the middle of the table.
I didn't know that, but I absolutely love it. In fact, they should bring back that service, rent a pineapple.
So far, I mean, what are we, 9, 10 minutes in? You've listed off a series of paintings, a series of artists, a series of exhibitions at galleries. How did you become so knowledgeable about this subject?
I should start by saying I really am no expert, and I am not knowledgeable in the way that I'm sure some of your other podcast guests are on their specific topics. I'm more of a hopeless traveler passing through different fields, trying to pick up what they can. But think of me as just an amateur enthusiast. But as to how I got onto art specifically, as to how I started the account, I studied theology and religious studies at university. There's a whole backstory behind that and how I ended up doing that. But it was mainly for personal interest. And I started the account because I remember being in some dusty corner of my university library, normally where the theology books are. There aren't many theology students around the country. And I just remember I was reading a book for my dissertation, and I came across the line. It was the Bodhikaya by the Buddhist monk Shantideva, and the line said, "What is the point of trying to cover the surface of the earth with leather if all I need to do is cover the surface of my feet, the soles of my feet, and I achieve the same purpose? Just as what is the purpose of trying to control all events around me when all I need to do is control my mind and I achieve the same goal?" And I just remember thinking, that needs to be shared. It's too good to be sitting in a dusty library for some next student to stumble across in God knows how many years or decades. So I set up the account, started sharing it, but then I also pointed out gaps in my knowledge. And I guess that's where it wasn't art focused originally. I'd always looked at paintings all the way up until probably about 18, 19 and said, I don't get it. I just really don't get it. People go to galleries to look at paintings. I find it really boring. I don't understand it. And then I just began to think maybe you're missing a trick here. And the problem that it's a gap, that's a gap. That's a me problem, not an art problem. There's something there. And so by further questioning, I got into it bit by bit. And now it's something that I absolutely love. But as I say, in an amateur enthusiast sort of way.
So what is your favorite, say, genre of art? If I was to put you on the spot.
Oh, that's really difficult. Really difficult. I don't think I could say anyone in particular. I have a couple of I I go through phases. I go through phases. I think impressionism is particularly interesting because it's at the end of a lineage of art that goes all the way back to Renaissance and pre-Renaissance. But and then there's a question as to whether impressionism is the end of art as we knew it, or whether it is another period in the sacred thread of art. But I don't have. I also love the Jean-Léon Gérôme and the academic approach. Uh, the pre-Raphaelites as well. There's just too many to name. I think at the moment though, I'm particularly taken by. I've been going to the Musée de Beaux-Arts in Belgium, around the corner, which has a lot of Flemish art, and I currently really like Bruegel the Elder, but all the younger also interesting. But I particularly like Bruegel, and I think it's because the more I've looked into it, I used to take the same approach to still life, so I found it quite dull and boring. But if you look at, for example, The Fall of Icarus, I don't know if you know the painting, but it's the one where it's a landscape and The Fall of Icarus, which we now know is a copy of a Bruegel. Everyone thought it was a Bruegel up until the 90s. They did some analysis and worked out, oh, this is probably a copy of a Bruegel. But you've got the scene, but there's always twists on it. And at that time, what's so fascinating as well, it's another little key into history, is that following the Protestant Reformation, art in the north of Europe changed because there was less of an emphasis upon painting for the church. And so people began to paint daily scenes of people, of farmers, of life, of landscapes. And with that came off a branch and an offshoot that the Italian Renaissance had never really explored to the same degree. And just on The Fall of Icarus in particular, what I find so interesting about it is, and it ties into Auden's poem, where he talks about, titled Musée de Beaux-Arts, he talks about how Icarus has fallen, but all you can see is just one leg sticking out of the ocean. I mean, there's another entire scene. And in his poem, he writes how, life turns away so nonchalantly, or something, turns away so nonchalantly from disaster. And the farmer's ploughing, the ship's there, there's a city in the background, and poor old Icarus has just had the worst moment of his life, and yet life goes on as normal. And Bruegel has purposefully twisted Ovid's description of it, where for Ovid, everyone's saying, oh my gosh, a god has fallen down from the heavens. But for Bruegel, he twists it to send to give a subtle message that right now, as we're speaking, someone is having their best day and someone is having their worst day, but the world goes on. And there's something depressing about that, but there's also something liberating in the sense that we're all part of this great continuum, and all we can do is do our best with the time that we have.
So is the secret there of understanding, say, that painting or other paintings, time? So do you just need to sit and look? So there's this exercise done by an author called Johann Hari, and he would prescribe people to go into a gallery and choose a painting at random and sit in front of it for 3 hours nonstop. And he said that by the last hour, you're going to be picking up so much detail that you didn't even pick up in the first 2 hours. So therefore, to understand a painting, is the secret ingredient time, or is it external information, external research that would be the key to unlocking the lessons in the painting?
Yeah, so I think it goes back to what we were originally talking about, which is what are you trying to get? I remember going to one of the most interesting experiences I had in a gallery was I went to a painting and meditation class at the National Gallery that was just held in the evening. And it was an hour and a half spent in front of this one painting with someone to guide you through it. And I think it was a Lorraine painting. So very beautiful country landscape, rolling hills. And in fact, on Claude Lorraine, one of my favorite things is that he was, sorry, I'm digressing. I'll come back. But he was, his paintings were, his paintings were so idyllic that when a scene looked too good to be true, the French people would say that it was pittoresque. It was like a Claude Lorraine painting. So that's where we get picturesque from,
Oh,
the
wow.
English word. And so it was just, focus on this corner. Look at how the blue changes its shade slowly. And there, of course, we weren't necessarily going for a deeper understanding of the painting. You were looking for peace and tranquility and stillness of mind. But with that, you picked up more things. You notice how maybe the artist uses different pigments, or a brushstroke changes here or there. So it depends on what you're seeking to gain. It goes back to that very romantic idea that I think there is a lot of space and time to be given for the fact that beauty and feeling is something that is just transmitted. There are some things that you're not going to research your way out of, and it explains why some pieces of art speak to some people and just don't speak to others. And no amount of research is going to change that, and that's okay.
When I walked around the Louvre, my favorite subject, and it's quite an obvious subject when walking around the Louvre, is Napoleon. Just seems to be like every 10th painting or whatever, but there was always something striking about it. It was always Napoleon. It was just so good, like, peak France, as it were. But even stuff which isn't, say, in the Louvre, Napoleon at Brienne by Jacques Gaston, I believe. And obviously then there's the famous one of him crossing the Alps by Jacques Louis David. And they're all called Jack. It's France, I guess. But my actual trivial fact. Do you know the famous one of him, Napoleon crossing the Alps? He's on a white horse that's rearing.
Yeah.
That the horse was actually bred in Ireland.
Was it?
Yeah, because all during the Napoleonic Wars, etc., everyone just got their horses from Ireland because they were like the most famous and reputable breeders at the time. So
That's fascinating. I know. Well, I mean, David also painted one of my favorite paintings, which has got a very different message on Napoleon. Have you seen Bonaparte Before the Sphinx?
yeah.
Yeah. So what I love about that is it's him coming to terms with what will become of him, or what becomes of any ruler, any dynasty. And in the background you've got the battle raging on, which shows that real life's continuing, but Napoleon's having this almost existential moment where he's looking at what the remains of a once great, now crumbling empire looks like, and it will happen to him. And he realizes it. He seems mesmerized, but I love it.
Actually, while we're on Napoleon trivia facts, one of my favorite is that after the Battle of Waterloo, the Duke of Wellington managed to get his hands upon this statue that a French sculptor did of Napoleon, depicting him as a demigod. And he managed to get it. I don't know how he got it, but then he put it as a cloak hanger in his London townhouse. So anytime any guests came on, they could hand their cloak upon this statue of Napoleon of this acted as a demigod. Just like
How very,
the petty British humour.
how very British.
So that's one area of British history, Waterloo. To probably one of the most famous of which you've talked about is Magna Carta. What is it, and why should we know about it?
Oh, great question. Why should we know about it? Because there's an argument, a very strong argument, that says it is the founding document for modern human rights and modern democracy. Now, some would challenge that and go further to Cyrus the Great. Some go back to the Sassanid Empire and say that Cyrus the Great was the first person who created modern human rights. Now, the reason for that is that he allowed freedom of religious expression. He, in fact, built the temple in Jerusalem. He rebuilt it, and I think Jewish religion still to this day in parts of the Torah will mention Cyrus the Great as as a special figure, elevated to beyond the stance of humans. But the Magna Carta in particular is important because it was a moment where in then England, the king's authority was challenged and successfully, and power was put into the hands of knights. And although that didn't change anything for day-to-day citizens, democracy is a path, and different parts of history and different countries at different parts of history at different points on that path. But it was a critical path where power was taken away, well, not taken away, but distributed from one sole sovereign to many others. And you could say that it was the moment that ignited the process that eventually ended with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and plenty of, and the modern legal system. But it basically endowed rights upon subjects that previously hadn't existed.
So then, when people say that Britain invented democracy, are they alluding to Magna Carta there, or are they thinking about other things?
Oh, that's a very good question. I'd ask them back. I'd say, what do you mean by that question? I would say it's subjective. As I've said, Persians have a good claim to have created democracy. You could argue many things for where democracy started, and you can even then say, what is democracy? I mean, do you define it simply? There are different democratic systems around the world at the moment. Is it one person, one vote? Is it proportional representation? Is it constituency, states, federal? I mean, it's a difficult question, and one that I don't have the answer for.
So, with your page, you dedicate a lot of time to art, history, and philosophy. Is there a connecting link that you see between those three things, or do you view them as three independent things of which you draw from and then make videos and information about?
Really good question. I think that they are independent but interlinked. I personally, why my account is called History, Art, Philosophy is it has been for a number years since I started. But in reality, I think they are just sources where inspiration can come from. And inspiration isn't limited to any one discipline. I think you can get it from a bird landing on a tree, or a lovely poem. Literature isn't mentioned, or photography, or cinema. I mean, the options are endless, and that's before you go into human-to-human interactions and every person's lived experience. But I think they are three beacons that I will turn to, and which will always, inevitably, sometimes with a lot of effort, lead to some sort of momentary enlightenment. I should stress here that I'm no expert in the slightest. I have a lot to learn, but I find they are, to the second part of your question, they are also interlinked. A great example of this is the Great Wave off of Canada. I'll give you two examples. Is that all right?
Yeah, please do.
So Caspar David Friedrich, in his painting The Monk Before the Sea, wonderful painting. Look it up. It's this solitary monk standing before the vastness of the ocean and the grey clouds, and he's on a cliff edge, and that is Kant's sublime. You know, that's Kantian. That's Kant's description of the sublime, a human coming to terms with the sublime, not the beautiful. And there you've got the link into that sort of aesthetic philosophy. Uh, but then you've got The Great Wave off of Kanagawa by Katsushika Hokusai. And you look at that and it's beautiful, but you see individual tiny human people which are part of the scene. And then you look into, well, why is that the case? Why in one do you have A Monk Before the Sea, where the monk is sort of, in a way, central despite the vastness of the sublime. And in the other, the humans are sort of, to a degree, afterthoughts. You can then go a step deeper and say, well, there could be a religious or philosophical reason for that. In the Western world, Christianity, which has been the foundation of much of the Western world, you could argue, is based on the individual personal relationship between you and God. And then if you add on top of that humanism, the rights of the individual, we becoming I, you can understand why the individual is central. If you look at Japanese culture and you look at those that have been influenced by Buddhism, in Japan, Zen Buddhism in particular, there is no self. That is one of the core marks of existence, anatta, no self. There is nothing that is permanent. You are part of a collective and there is no you. Everything is flowing. So it's no wonder that you have the people as afterthoughts. So you see how you can begin to sort of tie dots together. And that's before we even get into the fact that maybe there's no religious background for it whatsoever. For example, that there could be a very geographically based one. So in the West, it's not very wet. You can grow wheat. In the East, Southeast Asia, it typically is wetter. So you grow rice. Rice requires vast irrigation systems, which means you need the whole community to come together, whereas wheat is a relatively less community intensive activity. So you've got those reasons as well. The many, the individual, the religious emphasis, the relationship with an individual relationship with God. You can just keep going. So, I mean, they are interlinked. Sorry, I rambled on there a bit.
So what are your thoughts on these three domains of art, history, and philosophy being superior mediums, as it were, to something like film or photography, for example? So if I was sitting on a tube and reading a philosophy book, I would feel quite good about myself, and I'm sure the people opposite would be like, oh, he's reading a philosophy book, cool. But if I was sat there, watching a film on my phone, they'd be like, mate, what are you doing? You can't hear over the sound of the tube anyway. So there seems to be a perceived differentiation of value between different mediums, and the ones in which you've chosen seem to have like a societal higher value. Would you agree with that? Would you disagree with that? What are your thoughts?
I disagree with that. I would question who the individual is that is making that judgment, and if it's society, like, I know this is not, Being in Time is too complex. I've dipped in and out, but Being in Time by Heidegger, it's too complex. I've dipped in and out. But I know that one of his main points is on they self. We live our lives like they people. We do what they do. We live our lives according to what they do. But only when you are confronted with your own personal death do you begin to live a life that's true to you. Death shows you what is important to you. And I don't think there's any individual who's right to say what is that thing that's important to you and how you find that out. As I said earlier, I think you can get inspiration from many, many different places. There is a classification of higher or lower. I do think there is something to be said about the fact that classics are classic for a reason. There have been plenty of people who have gone through history agreeing it. So you've got a longer time span to just say, hey, maybe I should try read Middlemarch, which I'm trying to read now, because it's just it must be a classic for a reason, and I'm not disappointed. Is it difficult at times? Yes. Is it easier to watch Netflix? Yes. But I'm loving it, and I'm sure that it will make my life all the richer for it. But I don't think one can prescribe what the right or the best or the highest form of art or culture or appreciation or any medium is. Yeah. What are your views?
I'd say a lot of the time that the message is in the medium. So, for example, if we were to take War and Peace, it's going to take you around 50 hours of reading to complete, and therefore it can be perceived as more valuable given the fact that you had to invest 50 hours into the reading and the processing of the book, whereas, say, a film, pretty low cost, pretty low investment. You can just sit there and you don't have to concentrate on all the time. That being said, horses for courses. I read fairly regularly, but I really engage with audiobooks. Just how my brain works. Do people perceive me as less valuable because I had to listen to the book rather than read the book? I don't know. I don't think so. I think a book's a book, and you're transferring information from the page or from the audio file into your mind to then concentrate. So ultimately, I get the whole argument of it's more valuable because of the investment in which you had to place in the first place. Just like a gold medal is more valuable than, well, any other prize because of the amount of effort and value, the investment, it's a whole lifetime of dedication there. But I also think ultimately horses for courses, do what you want to do.
And it's also culturally independent, right? Like Dostoevsky and Middlemarch and George Eliot, their works were published for popular consumption at the time. They were published in I can't remember whether it's pamphlets or newspapers, but they were put out serially, and people would wait to devour them. So at the time, I don't know whether they were seen as highbrow in their own day, but later on they do. I think time tends to bestow a sense of gravitas upon pieces of work or pieces of art that we don't in the present afford other works. A good example would be W. Somerset Maugham, who I think is a fantastic author. His short stories are sensational. At his time, he was looked down upon as a popular author. And I have no doubt that right now, if you're sitting on the tube reading Stephen King, someone might go, Stephen King's, great books, but very popular. I have no doubt that there are going to be blue-backed Penguin modern classics of him at any time. Like it's inevitable. They are classics. So there's something to be said for stripping away, trying to take yourself out of the modern present day context, which is near impossible, but I'm sure it will come back at some point.
Would you have, off the top of your head, any key books in which you would recommend someone as they wanted to start a sort of classical education and wanted to take the first step? Something that they have the chance to wrestle with, but won't be overwhelming for them.
Oh, great question. I would say, and all kind of A-level history of art students or any history of art student ever, I didn't do history of art, will roll their eyes, but I'll say The Story of Art by E.H. Gombrich is a fantastic introduction. Long, big, but it really is brilliant. It's one of the main ways I got into art, by sitting at my local pub, not drinking at all, but just sitting there by the fireplace reading through this book for days on end. Fascinating. I think if one is interested on the more spiritual side, and I'm biased here because I specialized in Buddhism at university, and that's probably one of the areas or one of the rooms in the Museum of Life that I've delved into in a bit more detail. But Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse, it's not a Buddhist text, but it walks you through what Buddhism is and puts you in the context of the Buddhist life and existence in such a beautiful way. And then I had a third. Oh, and then I think third for philosophy. One of the best ways into philosophy I tend to find is via existentialism, not because it's the easiest, but because it's maybe one that one can comprehend. One can comprehend its approach in a slightly more simple way. It's not simple, but I'd say L'étranger, The Stranger by Albert Camus is a great way to, where you put the book down and you're thinking, what did I just read? And so then maybe you'll go and explore some other things and try and work it out. And then before you know it, you're looking into Sartre and maybe even Turan. So
I was having a conversation on the podcast actually with an author, and he had a rule, which is George Orwell's rule of never use a long word when a short word will do. And I wanted to ask him about it because I think it's quite an interesting point. So if we took that philosophy, for example, we would rip up a lot of the classics. I mean, you mentioned Heidegger. My goodness, if you put Heidegger into a Grammarly file, you'd just come up with all blues and reds. The example I used was John Ruskin. Yeah, there's an enjoyment about reading something with more, to put it in layman's flowery language. Joe, there's enjoyment, and it's more of a journey than just straight facts or words into brain. That there's more of a meandering process that happens as you read it. And I wondered, what did you think? Is it should it be short, straight, to the point, or are we allowed to enjoy more flowery language?
Great question. I am in no way qualified to comment on that. I think there is something to be said for the. There's on the one hand the message you're trying to get across, or the story, or the plot line, and then there's the joy of reading. I love Evelyn Waugh, for example, because of the way he writes. His sentence structure, the words he uses. I can't quite put it into words, but that's why I read Waugh. Brideshead Revisited, you could argue not much really happens in terms of a storyline. There's not many cliffhangers or this or that, but it's just such a beautifully written prose that you can't help but be swept along with it. um, I think there's space for both. I mean, at the end of the day, language is, and this is something that ties into what the Buddhist philosopher Alan Watts speaks about, but also Desmond Tutu with Ubuntu theology. You know, language is the building block for our society. It's taught us all how to be who we are, and we operate within those language-based rules. And so, as to how one deploys that language, I don't think it's particularly important. We're all playing within the same set of rules. We're all trying to communicate with one another using different mediums, different ways. So I'd say it depends on the purpose, and then you can throw in poetry, and there, I mean, language takes on a whole new different meaning. And what's the right way to do it? I don't know.
You mentioned God earlier. Talk to me about Protestantism and the capitalist spirit. You made a short video about it. Why we might have Martin Luther to thank for something like Coca-Cola or McDonald's.
There is a strong argument to be said for thanking Martin Luther for, yeah. So next time, I think I ended that video by saying, so next time you get your Big Mac meal or the likes, thank Martin Luther for your side of ambition, or something along those lines. But yes, I think it's one of the most I think that period in history, the early 16th century, turn of the 15th century, is just one of the most absurd. You can call it a freak storm that happened at that time, but you had the printing press in 1450, which gave people like Luther, Zwingli, Calvin the tools they needed to distribute their Protestant ideas. So previously, ideas would have been localized in a village here, a village there, no way of spreading it beyond someone going out and giving speeches and traveling far and wide. Not to say that can't work. I mean, Paul with Jesus did a remarkable job of doing just that, and the early followers of Jesus did a great job. That things can spread, but it's much harder. So now you had a complete expansion of ideas, and whether that's Erasmus with humanism or whether that's Protestantism with Luther, Calvin, and Zwingli, things are spreading along a lot faster. But we'd have to go into the roots of Martin Luther's theology to understand how that led to capitalism, and also then just briefly discuss Max Weber's theory. It's a theory that Max Weber put forwards in his work, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. So Martin Luther, I'm not going to say he hated the Catholic Church. He saw it as corrupt. It was distanced from the true word of God. You had to go back to what the Bible really said. The problem was, the Bible being the foundation of Christianity, no one could understand it. It was preached in Latin. People couldn't speak, we couldn't read. They couldn't read Latin. They couldn't understand it. So Martin Luther said, right, well, we're going to try and print the Bible in the languages that we used at the time. But there were also plenty of other theological problems, one of which being that people of the time went to church, didn't understand anything, and then when to go to heaven, all they had to do was pay indulgences, which is basically a bribe you gave to the church, and then the priest said, great, you're going to heaven, don't worry, just pay your indulgence next time. So that took away a lot of the guilt, and people just went to church as a cultural thing. Martin Luther said, that's wrong, that's corruption. But by removing indulgences, you introduce another problem. Whereas indulgences were bad, at least they let me know that I'm going to heaven, or at least they let me believe I'm going to heaven. How do you then square that circle? How does someone know they're going to heaven? So Martin Luther said, well, because of predestination, God knows who's going to heaven and who's going to hell. It's already decided. God knows. But that's not good enough, because you're going to be filled with angst to try and prove to yourself and your neighbor that you are going to heaven. And so how do you prove that? If you're a Catholic farmer, you may have farmed one field just to feed enough for your family. But a Protestant farmer is now beginning to tie material success to signs that they are part of the elect, predestined to go to heaven. So they start farming more and more and more and more and more to demonstrate that point. And that is how, according to Max Weber, you end up with McDonald's. That is what kickstarts. Obviously, Max Weber didn't talk about McDonald's. He was way before McDonald's came about. But that is how you end up with the capitalism that we see at the moment. Yeah, which develops. It's fascinating.
It's funny though, because even now it echoes in the modern prosperity movement, which happens a lot, say in the States of if you're right with God, he'll then bless you with health and wealth. And I always found that quite funny because the one person who was, say, the most right with God was Jesus. And what happened to him? He was tortured and then killed.
Yeah. I think I'm talking about I found at university Bible stuff, biblical stuff, or trying to go in to find out who the person of Jesus was really difficult. There's very little that can be said. But sorry, I've taken it off tangent.
No, please do. Let's delve into it. In fact, I'll ask you then, say, about your time at university. It's interesting doing a theology degree or diving a lot into that and not been, say, a Christian yourself or been taught by people who aren't Christians. How does that all work? What angle do they come at it? And then how do you embark upon it? Is it just, studying, the Gospel of Luke? Is that just the next seminar on from looking at, Homer's Iliad? Are they treated in the same way? Is there differences?
Great question. So as to how I ended up studying theology, I was brought up in two different backgrounds. My father's family is Zoroastrian and my mother's family are Christian. I'm not particularly religious myself. At best, I'm agnostic. But I always found an internal tension with the fact that a lot of adherents to religions are exclusivist, and they would basically say that if you're not an adherent to this religion, you will end up being damned to eternity. You'll spend your life in eternal damnation. And I didn't like that because that's one side of my family eternally damning the other, and the other side eternally damning the other. So that sort of made me interested in trying to understand what understand more. Are there other explanations? Are there other arguments? But I think also at school, theology was one of the first subjects that got me to think, and I think some of my fellow students said the same thing. It asks you what is ethics? What does it mean to live a life worth living? Can good or bad be subjective or objective? Those types of things, which when you're a teenager, it's just fascinating to your mind. So that led me to theology. There was a lot of Christianity, but I tried to broaden out my degree as much as possible. At the beginning, I did some. It wasn't specifically studies of Luke, but normally they're around specific areas. So the person of Jesus was a really interesting paper I took on trying to strip back everything that was added by the authors of the Gospels and by Mark and by later Christianity to who the person of Jesus actually was. And there's very little you can say. There are clues. Crucifixion was a crime reserved only for enemies of the Roman state. Does that lead us in a direction that Jesus was a zealot? Or does it lead us in a direction that maybe he was punished just because his religious fervor was causing difficulty? All these different questions. But by the end, I'd begun to specialize more in Hinduism, Buddhism, religious studies as opposed to theology. There's the distinction in the sense of one looks at religion as religious studies looks at religion as a phenomenon within the world and its interaction with other areas such as sociology, history. Theology is more of an Aquinas-esque or St. Augustine-esque deep dive into the philosophical frameworks of a religion.
That's quite interesting. So do you, for example, having spent a lot of time looking at Buddhism or Hinduism, then come back and look at the West and the Western values in a different way?
I don't think I'd look at the West or Western values in a different way, but it definitely made me look at my own values in a different way. As I said, most people, but I'm a particular work in progress. I don't think that journey ever stops, and you always have something to learn from different cultures, different authors, different artists. I think Buddhism was a real epiphany moment for me where it made me realize that, wow, there's a complete other way of seeing the world that I just would never have come across in my day-to-day lived life and childhood. And, studying Buddhism, a lot of people see it as depressing. It basically starts off with the premise the Four Noble Truths are all life is dukkha, suffering. Dukkha is caused by samudaya, which is craving. We crave permanence on things that are impermanent. There is no you, no me. Everything is constantly changing. We seek permanence in an impermanent world, and that leads to a deep sense of dissatisfaction. That sounds really depressing, right? But it's also liberating because it makes you appreciate that your worries and concerns are not these great objective things that exist out there, but they're rather part of this ever constant flowing sea of change, and that allows you to change, but it also allows you to not take everything a bit more lightly.
Do you see any correlation between that and, say, the famous bus banner by the New Atheist movement of "God's probably not real, stop worrying"?
I so I haven't been back to London for quite some time, so I haven't seen it. Interesting take. What does it look like? What are they going for?
I don't know. It's just that basically on the side of a bus, it was so that they were trying to alleviate the existential angst of people of saying he's probably not real. You don't need to worry. And then when you were talking about the aspects of life, of the liberating feeling and that you had, it reminded me of this bus banner, and I thought, is there any correlation?
I think outside of the religious frameworks, whether there is a God or isn't a God, and whether that is the answer, I think just Buddhism as a philosophical system or as a way of life is incredibly compelling. I don't think there is any, I can't remember exactly who said it, but I don't think there is anything in Buddhism's core tenets that a quantum physicist could disagree with. It says, and but it's not just a uniquely Buddhist teaching. I mean, Heraclitus said, "No man steps in the same river twice because he is not the same man, and it is not the same river." Schopenhauer then picked up Buddhism, you could argue, and transformed Tanna into the will. The will wants this. The will constantly attaches itself to all these different elements. So I think it's it's something, and something very existentialist about it. But at the same time, what I love about it is, given we're now talking about 2,500 years ago, probably longer, the Buddha or others, the historical Buddha is almost, if not more of a nightmare than the historical Jesus. But it, came along and basically created a religious or philosophical way of life that has so many applicabilities in today's day and age, more so than ever. So in answer to Buddhism, to that bus banner, I'd say, well, yeah, Buddhism doesn't say there's a God, but it certainly helps you stop worrying.
That's a good link. I like it. So where do you stand on it then? Of the whole, you've dived into Christianity, you've dived into Buddhism, you've dived into Hinduism.
Undecided.
Undecided.
I think about this sometimes more, sometimes less, depending on a number of different factors. I don't buy the whole God of the Gaps arguments, but I also do think that there are things that we just will not know. I think one of the most compelling theological explanations for different religions and different gods, my starting point is going to be that there can be no one religious truth. My own lived experience has led me to a position where I just cannot accept any sort of religious exclusivism. Now, I know some Christians might challenge me and say, well, have you not read the Bible where it says, I am the way, the truth, and the life? There is no way to the Father other than through me. Fine, but I know there are also Christian inclusivists, whether it's Karl Rahner's anonymous Christian idea or other ways of formulating it, or Desmond Tutu, who wrote a book saying God is not a Christian. One of the most preeminent Christian bishops wrote a book called God is Not a Christian. So there are different ways of looking at it. I think for me, John Hick, he was a academic, I don't know, a theologian of sorts, but he was also sort of a phenomenologist of religion. And he said, you look at all these different religions, each arriving in isolation. And why is that? Well, he created the idea of the real. It's similar to the man is homo religiosus. Every man has a spiritual seed planted in them. But there's this real, this entity, this thing. You can't talk about it. You'll never fully understand it. And all religions get a little grasp of it and then form their own religion around it. It could explain why the golden rule, treat others as you like to be treated, is found in pretty much every religion globally. There's an argument also there that there's more of a sociological reason and harmonization of societies, but that's one possible explanation. And so every religion is like a planet revolving around this sun that it can't grasp and only gets a tiny, tiny percentage of. You can't describe it. And I find that quite compelling. Now, I don't think I don't want to comment on whether there is this thing called the real or what it is, but of all of the arguments that claim that there's some sort of a higher being, it's the one I find most compelling and the one that rationalizes the existence of different religions with the fact that there may be multiple paths to the top of a mountain.
You did a really interesting series on the origins of religion, and I was wondering if you could give a quick 0 to 60 on the key theories and the key theorists.
If we park the religious explanations, Ludwig Feuerbach basically anthropomorphizes religion. Humans come along, we want things from nature, we can't get them. So we create a god who's all powerful because we want to be all powerful. We create a god who's all kind because we want to be all kind. So that is how religion exists according to Feuerbach. Emil Durkheim comes along and says, no, religion is the glue that holds society together. It is a form of collective effervescence where we all go and participate at church. We participate in ceremonies where there are totems around which the whole of our society is built. And that's his explanation. And then John Hick, I just explained. But then you've got Karl Marx, who says it's the opiate of the masses. And so there are so many different explanations for the existence of religion. I find absolutely fascinating. I don't know whether anyone will actually answer the question once and for all.
It would certainly be a tall order, that's for sure. Amazing. Well, Kai, what can we expect from you going forward? More interesting things on Instagram and further afield, I hope.
Yeah, we'll see. Look, I do this because I enjoy doing it. But as I said at the beginning, I really am no expert in anything. I'm just someone who is trying to understand as much as I can about the world with my limited tools that I have.
The philosophy of a keen amateur is a great one to have. Guy, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I've really enjoyed your time. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Cheers, Joe.